let's talk about campaign committees first. These are campaign committees that are filing on a quarterly basis. So their covered period would include the semi-annual periods, and those are just the 6-month periods, the January 1st through June 30th period, then the July 1st through December 31st. Okay, those are the 2 semi-annual periods. But the covered period for the Form 3L also covers the quarterly reporting periods. So for this year, since it's a non-election year, campaigns are still filing on a quarterly basis, but generally will not have any pre- or post-election reports in any shortened periods. The exception to that is any special elections they may have, but there's only a few of those that are active now. But generally, campaigns are filing quarterly, and it's just the regular calendar quarters. For example, the next report on July 15th will cover the 3 months prior to that, the April 1st through June 30th. We're talking calendar quarters. Now, in the election year for campaigns, since they do have a election, either primary and or general, in addition to the quarterly periods, the 3-month periods, they will have shortened pre- and post-election reports. Now let's go look at this visually on a calendar so we can see really how this works. First, let's look at the non-election year. Okay, so this is quarterly filing campaigns. First report due in a non-election year is the April 15th report covering the first 3 months of the year. Okay, so what a campaign would do is look to their lobbyist bundling activity. If it exceeds $16,000 during the first 3 months, they would file 3L on April 15th. Okay, and this again is in addition to the Form 3. Okay. Second quarter, due July 15th. Again, the covered period would be the April 1st through June 30th period. They look to those 3 months, review their lobbyist bundling activity. If there's 2 or more contributions from a particular lobbyist exceeding $16,000, that would be disclosed on 3L due on July 15th. Now, with the covered periods that I mentioned, for the reports due in July, there's also the semi-annual period they need to consider. Okay, so not only will they account for the April, May, and June period, but they would also aggregate lobbyist bundling activity for the entire first 6 months. Now, we know to folks who normally file reports that seems kind of counterintuitive to have 2 periods in one report. And I want to clarify that we're not talking about filing 2 separate 3Ls. It's not a semi-annual 3L and a quarterly 3L. When you look at the form, I know there's a lot of boxes and it looks a little daunting, but the reason is because it's going to accommodate not only the quarterly period, but also semi-annual. So there's enough check boxes which you can indicate, okay, this is my July 15th report. I'm covering the July quarterly reporting period as well as the first 6-month semi-annual period. Okay, so you'll see that on the first page. And then when we talk more about what is disclosed, there's 2 separate boxes where you disclose the total bundled for the quarter and the total bundled for the semi-annual period. Okay, so I just want to point out that Form 3L, there's only one 3L to accommodate both covered periods. Okay, we're not asking you to file 2 Form 3Ls. Okay, let's look at the election year for quarterly filers. Because of those pre-election reports, it does get a little bit more complicated. There's the April quarterly reporting period that we talked about before. But let's say the primary is in June and the committee triggers their pre-primary report. So they're filing their Form 3, 12 days before the election. In addition to that Form 3, they also need to look at their lobbyist bundling activity for that shortened period, for the month of April and half of May, to determine if any of the bundled contributions exceed $16,000 during that shortened period. So if it does, they would not only file Form 3 in June, but they would also file their Form 3L disclosing that shortened period. Okay? Then we get to the July quarterly report. And for those of you who file reports, you then start from the close of books of your last report through the end of the quarter. So again, that shortened 6-week period. You would look to the lobbyist bundling disclosure activity as well and see if anyone exceeded $16,000 during that shortened period. If they did, you would trigger 3L. But again, it's the July report, so as it was in the off year, not only do you look to that shortened period, you're going to also aggregate over the entire 6-month semi-annual covered period. Let's move on to quarterly filing PACs. Their covered periods would include the semi-annual periods we talked about, the 6-month periods, in addition to the quarterly reporting periods. Now, the reason it's different than campaigns, because any of you that represent PACs know that quarterly filing PACs actually file semi-annually in off-election years, such as this year. So for them, actually, 3L is pretty straightforward. They would look to their mid-year report due in July and see if they would aggregate their bundled contributions in the same schedule, and it would be only the one semi-annual period. Okay? Now, that, of course, if they have a special election, that would apply there, but as I mentioned, there's only a few of those. Now, in the election year, quarterly filing packs do file quarterly, and they would follow the similar schedule that we talked about with campaigns. Okay? So again, for quarterly filing packs this year, it's only going to be semi-annual. Now, let's look at those calendars again. And we're not going to look at the non-election year because it's just 6 months and 6-month aggregation for the $16,000. Now, for quarterly filing packs, it's actually very similar to what it was with the campaigns. You've got the April quarterly, noting the first 3 months and looking to the aggregation for those first 3 months to determine if you need to file 3L. And in the same scenario, let's say our PAC made a contribution to that candidate that was running in the election in June. They would trigger the 12P, and they would also look to that shortened period for lobbyist bundling disclosure. And then for their July quarterly, they would look for that shortened period to pick up for the rest of the quarter, as well as the semi-annual period. Okay, so the same as the campaigns were. And let me also note, and I didn't note with the campaigns, is that because of the effective dates of these rules, since they went into effect basically in the middle of this quarter, the first reports due under these rules will have adjusted coverage periods. And I'm not going to go over what those are. They're actually in your outline. So, for example, because record keeping wasn't started in January, the semi-annual figures for this year are not going to start January 1st through June 30. They're only going to pick up in March or April, depending on the type of bundler. Okay, so for those of you, when you file your first report, just note that in your head, and you can look to the outline. It will tell you what those adjusted periods would be. Okay, I just want to clarify that. Okay, the last type of committee we want to look at are monthly filers. Monthly filer covered periods are going to be that semi-annual period in addition to the monthly periods that are covered each month due the 20th of the next month. And for monthly filers, whether it's the election year or non-election year, they're always filing on a monthly schedule. However, in the election year, monthly filing packs do file pre- and post general election reports, and they would have those shortened periods, as we talked about with the campaigns. And as we saw with the others, the monthly reports are basically due, like, for example, the March 20th report covers the month of February. We've got the April 20th covering March, so we would do that for each month, look to the lobbyist bundling disclosure activity if anything exceeds $16,000 within those shortened periods. And then with the July report, as we mentioned, since that is the point where we have to look to the semi-annual period, we would not only look to the month of June for lobbyist bundling disclosure, but also the entire semi-annual period. Okay, so it works the same for each kind of committee, but the frequency by which they file 3L is determined by the filing frequency for their campaign finance disclosure reports. What this really boils down to are 3 basic questions you would ask to determine if you need to file Form 3L. First question is, does the reporting committee, again, the party committee, leadership PAC, or campaign, accept bundle contributions? Basically, do you give credit for contributions that you receive? And some people in their questions said, we don't give credit. So if the answer is no, you don't have to file Form 3L. You don't have to worry about these rules. But let's say you do give credit. The next question you need to ask is, do you give credit to folks who are lobbyists, registrants, or lobbyist registrant PACs? Remember, we talked about how you determine that through those 3 websites. And if the answer is, we give credit, but we don't give credit to lobbyists, then you don't have to file Form 3L. But let's say you do give credit to lobbyists. You have the last question you need to ask is the disclosure threshold. Because remember, the bundling disclosure doesn't just happen with the first bundled contribution. It has to exceed the $16,000 during the covered period. And so if it doesn't do that, you receive a couple bundled contributions and they add up to $10,000, then you're not going to be filing this because it doesn't meet the $16,000 threshold. But let's say it exceeds the $16,000 threshold, then yes. If the answer to all those 3 questions is yes, then you do file Form 3L. Okay? Forwarded contributions are automatically bundled, but if you receive it directly from the contributor, it's only bundled if you give credit. Okay, let me turn things over to Debbie because she's going to talk more about the disclosure. And you'll see when we look at 3L, it's set up like your regular disclosure reports with a Schedule A and B. Schedule A basically is used to disclose information about the lobbyist and how much they've bundled. And then Schedule B is used for any contributions or only when you have bundled contributions that are reported, deposited, reported, and then later refunded.